Nurse Mara Ellison stood in the bright doorway of the Hospital 9 recovery unit, while every white coat in the hall stared at the dog beside her and laughed. Bishop, the gray-muzzled shepherd, which no one at the shelter wanted, sat perfectly still at her knee. His torn leash looped twice around her shaking hand. "That thing," Dr. Victor Hale said, smirking as orderlies looked on. "You brought a junkyard stray into a military medical ward." Mara swallowed the sting in her throat and forced herself not to cry. Bishop only lowered his head, touched one dented tag against the sealed chart cart, and refused to move. Then the elevator opened. 3 soldiers stepped into the ward entrance, went silent at the sight of the dog, and one whispered, "Who opened file 9? Before this story unfolds, tell us where you are watching from. Leave your country name in the comments. And if you believe in courage, loyal animals, hidden heroes, hospital justice, and emotional reversals that remind people to look twice before judging, subscribe to 9 Rescue Nurse." The 9 Recovery Wing at Harewood Veterans Hospital was the cleanest place Mara Ellison knew. Every floor tile shone under the ceiling lights. Every leash hook was labeled. Every supply drawer closed with the same soft magnetic click. It was supposed to be a place where calm mattered more than rank, where working dogs came after long service, aging joints, stress responses, or routine therapy, evaluation. No sudden motion, no judgment. At least that was what the plaque beside the entrance claimed. But on Monday morning, the ward entrance turned into a courtroom, and Mara found herself standing on trial with a shelter dog beside her. Bishop did not look like the kind of dog people expected to see in a veterans hospital. His coat was a mix of charcoal, tan, and old smoke. One ear tipped sideways as if it had heard too many sad things and never recovered its full confidence. His muzzle had gone silver. His paws were too large for his narrow frame. He wore a donated blue collar with a faded brass tag that the shelter had nearly thrown away because no one could read the numbers clearly. To Mara, he was beautiful in the way quiet survivors were beautiful. To everyone else, he looked like a mistake. A pair of young residents paused beside the medication station. One whispered something and covered her mouth. An aide pulling clean blankets slowed down, then stopped completely. Dr. Victor Hale, Chief of Rehabilitation Medicine, stepped from the 9 unit with a tablet in one hand and his usual polished contempt in the other. Mara had worked under him for 3 years. She knew his expressions the way other nurses knew alarm tones. His amused smile was never a smile. It was a warning. "Nurse Ellison," he said, loud enough for the hall to hear, "why is there a shelter animal at my unit door?" "My unit?" He always said that when visitors were present. Mara kept her voice low. "He's cleared for temporary observation. Shelter intake reported possible prior service behavior. I submitted the request Friday." "You submitted a request?" Hale repeated, glancing at the residents. "And you assumed silence meant approval." "I assumed the intake note mattered." "The intake note says he responds to corridor commands and refuses to leave veterans alone. Half the dogs in this city would do that for a sandwich." A few people laughed. Mara felt the sound land in her chest. She had heard worse. She had heard relatives call nurses furniture. She had heard surgeons call them hands. She had heard administrators call them replaceable in rooms where patients could still hear. She had learned not to react. But today Bishop sat beside her with absolute trust, and somehow the laughter hurt more because it was aimed at him. He had arrived at the shelter 6 weeks earlier, found waiting outside the back gate before dawn. No note, no microchip that registered in the civilian database, no aggression, no panic, just a dog who refused food until someone spoke to him gently, then placed one paw on the nearest boot like he was asking permission to stay alive. Mara had gone to the shelter because her neighbor volunteered there and begged her to evaluate a dog who acted like he had rules. The moment Mara entered, Bishop had risen from his blanket, walked past 2 volunteers and 3 open bowls, and sat in front of her. Not excited, not desperate, just certain. He had looked at her as if she was late. That was the part she never told anyone. It sounded foolish. Nurses survived on what they could prove, chart, and sign. They did not tell chief physicians that Astray had recognized them from a life they tried not to discuss. "Remove him," Dr. Hale said. Now, Bishop's ear flicked. He did not look at Hale. He looked past him. Mara followed the dog's gaze into the unit. 4 kennels lined the left wall, though they were used more like quiet rooms than cages. 2 therapy dogs rested on thick pads. At the far end, behind a half-open privacy curtain, Corporal Daniel Reyes sat in a recliner, connected to monitors. He was 28, newly transferred from an overseas military facility after a training incident that the chart described in careful, empty language, stable, alert, under observation. Mara had met him once during overnight handoff. He had been pale, polite, and too tired to finish his sentence. His chart said anxiety, dehydration, exhaustion, and mild neurological symptoms. Hale said the young man needed rest and discipline. Mara had thought the chart felt thin. Bishop stood. The laughter faded slightly because the dog moved with purpose, not the jerky uncertainty of a shelter animal, not the distracted sniffing of a pet in a new place. He rose slowly, squared his shoulders, and took one measured step toward the 9 wing. Hale lifted a hand. "Absolutely not." Bishop stopped immediately. Not because Hale had command over him, Mara realized. Because the raised hand meant something to him. A boundary, a checkpoint. Mara's fingers tightened around the leash. "Bishop, sit." He sat. The residents exchanged looks. One of them lowered her hand from her mouth. Hale noticed. His smirk thinned. "Basic obedience," he said. "Congratulations." Then Bishop did something no one expected. He leaned sideways, gently pressing his brass tag against the corner of the locked chart cart beside the entrance. The tag gave one small metallic tap, then another. Tap, tap. Mara looked down. The brass was scratched and dull, but under the fluorescent light she saw more than the shelter number. The underside of the tag, usually hidden against his chest, carried tiny stamped letters. A 9. Her stomach tightened. Nightingale 9. No, that seemed to pull away from her. Dr. Hale stepped forward. "What is he doing?" Mara bent slightly, pretending to adjust Bishop's collar. Her thumb brushed the stamped letters. Beneath the brass tag was a second piece of metal, flat and black, almost flush against the collar lining. Not a pet tag, not a license. A data wafer, military issue, old pattern. She had seen one before in a place no civilian hospital record would ever name. Hale snapped. "Nurse Ellison." Mara straightened too quickly. "He might be reacting to something in the unit." "He is reacting to attention, which you are giving him." Bishop turned his head toward the privacy curtain at the far end of the room. Corporal Reyes had shifted in the recliner. His hand gripped the chair arm. His breathing looked controlled, but Mara saw the small signs nurses saw when no one else bothered. The fixed jaw, the strange stillness, the way his eyes tried to focus through a room that had suddenly become too bright. "Corporal Reyes doesn't look right," Mara said. Hale gave a sharp laugh. "Now the stray is diagnosing patients?" The aide laughed again, then stopped when Mara looked at the corporal. "His left hand," she said quietly. "What about it?" "It wasn't trembling during morning vitals." Hale did not turn. "You have not been assigned to him today. I reviewed the overnight board because you like involving yourself in cases that aren't yours." The sentence was soft, but it struck harder than the laughter. Mara knew what he meant. Everyone in the unit knew. 3 years ago, she had questioned a discharge order, found a medication conflict, and embarrassed a senior physician in front of a review panel. The patient had retired early. Mara had been praised in writing and punished in every hallway afterward. Since then, she had been careful, too careful. Her own conscience sometimes whispered. Bishop rose again. This time, he did not move toward the unit. He moved backward, placing his body in front of Mara's legs as if shielding her from the room. Then he looked directly at Corporal Reyes and gave one low sound. Not a bark, not a growl, a controlled warning, almost a breath. The monitor beside Reyes chirped. Mara stepped forward. Hale blocked her with his tablet arm. Do not make a scene. His pressure is changing. You cannot see that from here. I can see him. Enough. The word cracked through the hallway. People turned from the nurse's station. Somewhere behind Mara, someone murmured that she should take the dog back to the shelter before Hale wrote her up. Mara felt heat rise behind her eyes. She would not cry, not fear, not for herself. Not while Bishop sat with that impossible tag hidden under his collar, and a patient at the far end of the room looked like he was trying to stay conscious out of politeness. She opened her mouth to ask for access one more time. Then Bishop slipped his head down, caught the edge of his own collar with his paw, and pulled. The blue nylon twisted. The brass tag flipped outward. The black wafer slid free, hanging against his chest where everyone could see it. Doctor! Hale's smirk vanished for half a second. Mara saw the words etched in tiny white letters. Field Medical 9 attachment file, and 9 return to military liaison. Only the hallway went very still. Then Hale recovered, faster than mercy. Take that off him, he ordered. Whatever costume jewelry someone put on this dog, remove it before I call security. Mara whispered, that isn't costume jewelry. Hale leaned closer. Then prove it. Before Mara could answer, Corporal Reyes made a sound from behind the curtain. It was small, barely a word, but Bishop heard it. Mara heard it too. Patch, the corporal whispered, and Bishop stepped toward the unit door as if a mission had finally begun. Mara did not wait for permission after that. Nurses often learned that there were two kinds of rules. The kind written to protect patients and the kind spoken to protect pride. In that moment, Dr. Hale was standing between her and a patient whose body was giving warning signs too subtle for anyone who had already decided not to look. Bishop, hold, she said. The dog froze at the threshold. Mara moved around Hale. His hand caught the air near her elbow, not touching but close enough to be a threat. Nurse Allison, if you step into that bay with an uncleared animal, I will suspend your access. Then, suspend me after I check him. She crossed the room. The residents followed but stopped at the entrance. The A stood with blankets pressed to her chest. Hale came behind Mara with the cold, deliberate steps of a man preparing witnesses. Corporal Daniel Reyes sat half reclined, his face damp with effort. He was trying to smile, which frightened Mara more than panic would have. Patients who were afraid often fought. Patients who were trying not to inconvenience anyone sometimes slipped away quietly. Corporal, Mara said, kneeling beside the chair but keeping her hands visible. It's Nurse Allison. Can you tell me what feels different? His eyes moved toward her, then past her toward Bishop. Dog, he whispered. He's staying at the doorway, not shelter. Mara's heart knocked once. Hale exhaled sharply. This is suggestibility. He heard us discussing the animal. Mara ignored him. She checked Reyes' pulse manually while glancing at the monitor. The numbers were not dramatic enough to alarm a busy ward, but they were wrong for him. More important, his skin tone, pupils, hand movement, and speech pattern did not match the diagnosis in his chart. What medications were given after transfer? She asked. Hale lifted the tablet. Everything is documented. Were his overseas notes complete? They were sufficient. That is then what I asked. A resident drew in a breath. Hale's eyes cut toward her, and she looked down. Raye's fingers twitched against the chair arm. Bishop gave another low breath from the doorway. Mara leaned closer. You said patch? Did you mean a unit patch? Raye swallowed. No, medical patch. My bag. Yes, personal effects, Mara asked. The aide spoke before Hale could stop her. Lock cabinet. Intake shelf. Bring it. Hale snapped. No, Mara turned slowly. Why not? Because this is a medical unit, not a treasure hunt prompted by a stray. The word stray cut through her. Bishop was still at the door, calm as carved stone. He did not react to insult. That steadiness made Myra feel ashamed of how much she wanted to. She stood. Corporal Reyes might have information from his previous treatment that didn't make it into the chart. The transfer summary was signed by 2 physicians, and if it missed something, then we follow channels. Channels take hours. Drama takes seconds. The room seemed to hold its breath. Mara looked at the young resident nearest the medication cart. Her name was Priya Shah. She had kind eyes and the terrified posture of someone still deciding what kind of doctor she would become. Dr. Shah, Mara said, look at his left hand. Listen to his speech. Compare it to the morning note you signed. Priya's face changed. Just a little. Enough. Hale saw it. Dr. Shah, you are not being asked for commentary, but Priya stepped closer to Raya's professional instinct overcoming fear. Corporal, can you squeeze my fingers equally? He tried. His right hand responded. His left lagged. Priya looked at Mara. Mara did not say I told you so. There was no room for pride. Not with a patient in the chair. We need neurology patients. Labs repeated, and his outside medication record verified, Mara said. Hale's voice went very quiet. You do not direct physicians in my ward? No, Mara said. I advocate for patients in any ward. That was the first moment the laughter truly died. Bishop took one slow step across the threshold. No one stopped him. Even Hale seemed too focused on Myra to notice until the dog reached the privacy curtain. Bishop did not approach the patient. He sat beside the locked cabinet where personal effects were stored and placed one paw against the lower drawer. The aide whispered, How does he know? Hale barked. He smells food. Probably. Myra knew better. The drawer was sealed. No food, no scent, strong enough for a stray to identify from the hall, unless he had been trained to indicate a target. Bishop was not searching randomly. He was showing them where to look. The black wafer on his collar caught the light. File 9. Mara had spent years trying not to remember that code. Nightingale was the nickname given to a mobile field care team attached to special operations recovery missions. Not famous, not famous, not public, barely written down in regular records. Mara had not been a hero there. She had been a young nurse with a steadier hand than heart, thrown into situations where calm voices mattered as much as medicine. Nightingale 9 had been the last mission call sign before everything changed. Before she came home and became just Nurse Ellison at Halewood. Before she stopped answering questions about why helicopters made her hands go cold. Before she promised herself never again to confuse courage with making noise. But Bishop could not be from that world. No dog from that mission should have ended up at a city shelter with a civilian collar and a hidden wafer. No dog should have recognized a phrase from a half-conscious corporal. The aide opened the cabinet only after Priya said, softly, Dr. Hale, personal medical information might be clinically relevant. Hale stared at Priya as if she had betrayed him. Fine, he said, but document that this delay was caused by Nurse Ellison's unauthorized interference. The aide unlocked the drawer. Inside was a clear property bag with raised watch, wallet, folded shirt, and a small square patch sealed in plastic. It was not a unit patch. It was a medical alert patch, the kind sometimes attached inside tactical gear when service members moved between facilities with limited records. Mara took it only after the aide handed it to her. On the patch, faded lettering read, "Adverse response risk verified before sedation and 9-hole protocol pre-as. Face us color. This isn't in the chart." Hale grabbed the property list. It was not logged as medical documentation. "It should have been scanned," Mara said. "It was personal property. EE says verify before sedation. Do not lecture me." Rai's eyes fluttered. Mara lowered the recliner only enough to support him, keeping everything controlled, calm, non-frightening. She asked for oxygen support, repeated vitals, and a rapid response consult. Priya moved now without waiting for Hale. The aide set down the blankets and called the charge desk. The ward changed shape around them. Laughter became footsteps. Smirks became focus. Bishop stayed beside the cabinet, not crowding anyone, not whining, not seeking praise. He had delivered his clue and now waited. That waiting unsettled Mara more than if he had barked the ceiling down. Within minutes, the rapid response team arrived. Hale attempted to summarize the event as a mild change in presentation, complicated by unauthorized animal presence. Priya interrupted him once, voice shaking but clear, to mention the patch and missing protocol. Mara watched Hale's jaw tighten. Reyes was transferred for urgent imaging and specialist evaluation. The details remained clinical, contained, safe behind doors and forms. But the meaning was plain. If Mara had obeyed Hale, if Bishop had not indicated the cabinet, if the patch had stayed sealed with personal property, Reyes might have been treated under the wrong assumption for too long. When the corridor emptied, only Mara, Bishop, Hale, Priya, and the aide remained. Hale turned to Mara. "You were lucky." Mara clipped Bishop's collar back into place with careful fingers. "No, he was trained." "By whom?" She did not answer. Because she did not know. Because she feared she did. Hale stepped closer, lowering his voice so the others would not hear every word. "You have made a spectacle of my unit with a sheltered dog and a private fantasy about Secret Service records. I don't care what patch you found until military liaison confirms that tag. This animal leaves." Bishop looked up at Hale, calm and unblinking. The elevator chimed behind them. 2 uniformed military police officers stepped out, followed by a woman in a dark service coat carrying a sealed gray folder. She had silver at her temples, and a face Mara recognized from a life she had buried. Captain Elise Ward stopped at the 9-unit entrance. Her eyes moved from Mara to Bishop. Then she said, "Nurse Ellison, step away from the dog." Mara's breath caught. Captain Ward lifted the folder. "That animal is evidence in a restricted medical file." Mara had imagined many ghosts returning to her life. Faces from field tents, voices from late-night transport calls, names spoken during review hearings in rooms without windows. But she had not imagined Captain Elise Ward walking into Halewood Veterans Hospital with a sealed folder under one arm and 2 military police officers behind her. The last time Mara had seen Ward, the captain had been standing beside an evacuation vehicle, rain running down her face, telling everyone who could still move to get out first. Mara remembered arguing. Ward remembered ordering. Neither of them had won. They had simply survived different parts of the same impossible hour. Now Ward stood in a clean hospital corridor where the only sound was the distant hum of air filters. "Captain," Mara said, and hated how young her voice sounded. Dr. Hale looked between them. His contempt turned cautious. Authority, recognized authority, especially when it arrived in uniform with witnesses. "You know this nurse?" he asked. Ward did not look at him. "I know Staff Medical Specialist Mara Ellison." The old title moved through the hallway like a door opening in the floor. Priya looked at Mara. The aide's mouth parted slightly. Hale's eyes narrowed, recalculating. "I'm not active," Mara said. "No," Ward replied, "but your name remains attached to File A9. Bishop remained seated beside Mara, his shoulder barely touching her leg. That touch steadied her more than she wanted anyone to see. Hale lifted his chin. "Captain Ward, I am Dr. Victor Hale, Chief of Rehabilitation Medicine. If there is a restricted matter involving an animal brought into my ward without proper authorization, I expect to be briefed immediately." Ward finally turned to him. "You will be briefed to the limit of your clearance." The sentence was polite enough to bruise. Hale flushed. Ward opened the gray folder just enough to verify a page, then closed it again. "Who accessed the dog's collar tag?" "Did," Mara said. "Who saw the wafer?" Priya raised a hand slightly. "The aide did too." Hale said nothing for 2 seconds, then nodded. Ward's gaze went to Bishop. Something in her expression shifted. Not softness exactly, but recognition under discipline. "His shelter name is Bishop?" she asked. "That's what they gave him," Mara said. "And before that, I don't know." Ward looked down at the dog. "Alice." Bishop's ears lifted. No one spoke. The dog did not leap or bark. He simply turned toward Ward with the controlled attention of a working 9 who had heard an old name. Then, after one measured breath, he looked back at Mara and settled again at her side. The choice was unmistakable. Priya whispered, "Atlas." Mara's hand trembled against the leash. Atlas had been a field medical support dog attached to evacuation teams, trained not for attack, not for spectacle, but for search, stabilization, presence, and silent indication. He carried tags, patches, and scent-coded packets when electronic systems failed. He found conscious patients who could not call out. He stayed near medics during chaotic transfers so disoriented service members would follow a familiar animal instead of panic. He had belonged to the world Mara never discussed, but Atlas had been younger then. Stronger, dark-coated, and bright-eyed. He had worked with a handler named Sergeant Evan Cole, a quiet man who trusted the dog more than any radio. Mara remembered kneeling beside Atlas during one terrible night, pressing her forehead briefly to his, whispering, "Find Ward, bring help." She remembered attaching a black wafer to his collar because the main comm system had failed. She remembered Atlas disappearing into smoke and noise with impossible obedience. She did not remember anyone telling her he came home. Ward saw the memory cross her face. "Not here," the captain said. Hale gave a short laugh, though no humor lived in it. "You cannot expect to remove this matter from a medical unit after that dog interfered with patient care." Mara turned on him. "He helped patient care. He created confusion. He identified missing information. He is an animal." Ward's voice cut cleanly through the argument. "Atlas is a decorated medical support K9 listed as missing from a restricted recovery operation. His identification was never decommissioned." The aide made a small sound. Hale's face hardened. "Then why was he in a civilian shelter?" "That," Ward said, "is why I am here." Mara looked at Bishop, Atlas, and felt guilt rise so sharply she almost lost her breath. 6 weeks at the shelter. 6 weeks of people walking past him because he looked old, because he did not wag for attention, because he waited in silence for someone who knew the right word. Mara had almost walked past too. She had almost told her neighbor she could not adopt another wounded thing when she still had not forgiven herself for the ones she could not save. Atlas leaned against her knee. Ward noticed. "Captain," Mara said, What is File 9? The question cost her. She already knew pieces. Enough to fear the shape. Ward's fingers tightened on the folder. File N9 was sealed after the last Nightingale operation. It contains incomplete personnel transfers, medical hold protocols, and unresolved asset recovery notes. Atlas was one of the unresolved assets. Asset, Mara repeated, unable to hide the hurt. Ward's eyes flickered. Dog then. Soldier to some. Hale scoffed under his breath. Atlas turned his head toward him, not threatening, just witnessing. That somehow made the scoff sound ugly enough for everyone to hear. Ward stepped closer to Mara. Corporal Reyes' transfer should have triggered an N9 hold review. It didn't. Atlas recognized the patch, the patient, or both. His presence prevented an error from continuing. Mara glanced toward the hallway where Reyes had been taken. Will he be all right? He's being evaluated, Ward said. Early intervention matters. You know that? Mara did. That was why her hands shook now. Not from fear of Hale, not even from the file, but from the thin line they had almost crossed because one physician hated being questioned and one nurse had almost obeyed too long. Hale cleared his throat. If Nurse Ellison had disclosed her prior connection to restricted military medicine, perhaps this confusion. Mara laughed once. It surprised her. It surprised everyone. My prior connection, she said. You mean the one you mocked in my employment review? The one you call field aeronautics, where I asked for better transfer checks? The one you said made me oversensitive around veterans. Hale's expression went flat. Priya looked down, but not before Mara saw the truth in her eyes. She had heard stories. Everyone had. Ward's face turned toward Hale slowly. Hale said, I evaluate staff performance based on hospital policy. No, Mara said. Voice quieter now. You evaluate based on who embarrasses you. The hallway seemed too bright, too clean, too full of things unsaid. Ward opened the gray folder again and removed one page, but kept most of it covered. Dr. Hale, this document authorizes temporary military custody review of Atlas and all related N9 medical transfer failures at this facility. He repeated, Yes, you believe there are more? Ward looked at Mara, and Mara understood before the captain spoke. Corporal Reyes is not the only Nightingale-linked patient transferred here this month. Priya inhaled. The aide gripped the blanket cart. Mara felt the floor shift. How many? She asked. Ward hesitated. That hesitation was answer enough. Hale stepped backward half a pace. I have received no notice of restricted patients. That is part of the problem, Ward said. Then Atlas stood. Not quickly, not dramatically. He simply rose, turned away from the adults arguing over files and authority, and walked toward the main ward exit. The leash slid through Mara's hand until she caught it. He stopped at the doorway and looked back. The gesture was familiar enough to break something in her. Follow me. Ward saw it too. Her face changed. Mara said, He knows another patient. Hale snapped, Absolutely not. But this time no one laughed. This time Priya moved first, grabbing a portable vitals kit. The aide reached for her badge to open the next ward door. Captain Ward nodded once, and Mara followed the shelter dog. Everyone had mocked into the hospital corridor toward a patient no file had warned them about. Atlas led them not to the emergency department, not to imaging, and not to the official military liaison office 2 floors above. He led them through the side corridor that connected the 9 recovery wing to the long-term rehabilitation ward, where veterans learn to walk with new balance, speak after silence, sleep after fear, and trust rooms with closed doors again. Mara knew every corner of that corridor. She knew the vending machine that $8 bills, the window where families stood when they needed to cry unseen, the supply closet with the flickering light. She had walked it on double shifts, night shifts, holiday shifts, and once after her review board told her she had done the right thing, but should consider being less forceful when right. Atlas moved slowly enough for them to follow. That, more than anything, convinced Myra he was not wandering. He was managing the pace of a team. Captain Ward walked beside Myra. Priya followed with the kit. The aide, whose name was Jessa, came behind them because she knew the door codes and because Myra suspected she no longer wanted to stand on the wrong side of the story. Dr. Hale came too, not because he believed, but because he feared being absent from whatever would be written later. They passed 2 rooms without pause. At the third Atlas stop, room 214, Myra read the name on the display panel. Thomas Avery, age 61, former military logistics contractor. Admitted for observation after fainting during physical therapy. Mild confusion. Suspected medication non-compliance. No restricted flags. Myra frowned. Mr. Avery isn't active duty. Ward checked her folder. Not listed. Hale seized the point. There. The dog has brought you to the wrong room. Atlas sat. The certainty of that sit made Hale's words feel thin. Myra looked through the glass panel. Thomas Avery lay propped in bed, eyes closed. His daughter, a woman in her 30s, sat in the visitor chair scrolling anxiously through her phone. A lunch tray rested untouched on the table. The monitor showed acceptable numbers. Nothing screamed emergency. But Myra saw the angle of his hand over the blanket, the way his fingers curled as if holding something invisible. She touched the door handle. Hale blocked her again. You are about to disturb a stable patient because a dog sat down. Myra looked at him. Really looked. For years she had mistaken his certainty for strength. Now she saw what it was. A wall built to keep shame out. He could not admit a sheltered dog had been right once, because then he might have to admit a nurse had been right many times. Dr. Hale, she said. Come inside with me. If I'm wrong, write me up. His eyes narrowed. You think that frightens me? No, I think being wrong does. Priya coughed softly, almost hiding a gasp. Myra entered before Hale could answer. Thomas Avery's daughter stood. Is something wrong? We're just checking on him, Myra said. I'm Myra, one of the nurses. This is Dr. Shah. The daughter glanced toward the doorway where Atlas waited. Yes, Myra said gently. Yes, Myra said gently. Opened his eyes. For a second, he looked like any tired patient waking under hospital lights. Then his gaze found Atlas through the door window. His face crumpled, not with fear, with recognition so deep, it looked painful. Ward stepped into the room. Myra's pulse jumped. Mr. Avery, do you know that dog? His daughter frowned. Dad. Avery tried to sit up. Myra steadied him with a hand on his shoulder. Easy. No rush. He stared at Atlas. He came back. Ward moved closer. Thomas Avery. Did you serve in connection with Nightingale 9? Avery's sifted to her rank. Then to Myra. Something guarded woke in him, old training pushing through confusion. I was told not to speak, he said. You're safe, Myra said. His mouth twisted. That's what people say before files disappear. Hale stepped into the doorway. This is inappropriate. The patient is confused. Avery's eyes sharpened with surprising force. I am not confused about him. Atlas gave one soft breath from the hall. Avery reached weakly toward the bedside drawer. Patch, he said. Myra and Priya looked at each other. Not again. His daughter opened the drawer and took out a worn leather notebook, a pair of reading glasses, and a small envelope creased from handling. This? Avery nodded. She handed it to Myra. He kept asking for this last night, but no one knew what he meant. I thought it was old paperwork. Myra opened the envelope. Inside was a laminated card, cracked at the edges. It showed a series of field medical symbols and one handwritten line. If 9 Atlas indicates, verify hidden hold. On the back were 3 names: Daniel Ryle, Danma, Thomas Avery, Mara Ellison. The room seemed to tilt. Mara gripped the card. Why is my name here? Avery closed his eyes. Because you signed the whole. No, her voice came out too sharp. She lowered it. No, I signed evacuation triage notes. I didn't sign long-term holds. Ward looked at the card. This isn't in the sealed file. Hale had gone quiet. Avery's daughter looked terrified now. What is happening? Is my father in danger? Mara turned to her immediately. He is safe right now. We're checking whether an old medical instruction was missed. That's all you need to carry in this moment. The woman nodded, breathing shallowly. Mara examined Avery with Priya, asking simple questions, checking coordination, reviewing recent medications, hydration, and therapy notes. Again, nothing looked dramatic alone. Again, the pattern mattered. His symptoms had been explained away as age, stress, stubbornness, confusion. But the card suggested he had a known response risk from a past operation, one that required a specific review before certain treatments or exertion plans. Priya found the discrepancy in the medication administration record. This dosage changed yesterday, she said. Hale stepped forward, within acceptable range. For a standard patient, Mara said. For his age and weight, also acceptable. But not if the hidden hold applies. Hale's patience broke. There is no hidden hold in the hospital chart. Atlas stood at the doorway. Everyone turned. The dog did not enter. He lifted one paw and pressed it gently against the bottom of the closed door, near the metal kick plate. Tap, Avery whispered. He did that when systems were down. Ward stared at the dog. Manual verification. Mara remembered. When electronic tags failed in the field, Atlas had been trained to indicate physical backup documents. Door, drawer, by, person. He did not know medicine the way humans did. He knew patterns, scent markers, train signals, and people. He knew when a patient carried the wrong silence. Jessa, still outside, looked down the corridor. There's an old records room near the therapy gym. Some transfer boxes from overseas came in last month. They were supposed to be scanned, but the system backlogged. Hale snapped. Do not invent procedural failures. Jessa squared her shoulders. I logged the boxes myself. That was the second shift in how people treated Mara. First Priya had moved. Now Jessa spoke, not loudly, not rebelliously, but truthfully. Sometimes that was the beginning of justice. Ward turned to Hale. Shh. I am not taking orders from a dog, no, Ward said. You are responding to a federal medical inquiry. Hale's face closed. They stabilized Avery's immediate care plan, paused the questionable adjustment, and arranged physician review under Priya's documentation. Mara explained everything she could to Avery's daughter without violating what she did not yet understand. The woman took Mara's hand before she left. Thank you for not making him feel crazy, she whispered. The words nearly undid Mara. Outside, Atlas waited. As they moved toward the records room, Ward walked close enough that only Mara could hear. You signed something that night, the captain said. Might be not what you think. Mara shook her head. I don't remember. Or someone didn't want you to. Mara stopped walking. Ward stopped too. Ahead of them, Hale unlocked the records room with visible reluctance. Dusty transfer boxes lined the wall beside newer digital scanning carts. Jessa pointed to a stack marked Overseas Rehabilitation Intake. Priya knelt and read labels. Atlas went straight to the lowest box. He touched it once with his nose. Mara crouched. On the side of the box, under a shipping label, someone had written in black marker, A9, Pourquoi? Do not route through Halewood, Hale whispered. That cannot be. Ward's eyes went cold. Mara opened the box. On top lay a red folder with her old signature across the seal. The signature on the red folder looked like Mara's hand, but not her memory. She knew the shape of her own name, the narrow M, the sharp double L in Ellison, the final line that always lifted because she wrote too quickly during shift changes. There it was across the seal, dated 3 years earlier. Beneath the printed warning, Nightingale 9 medical hold transfer, only to authorize review Team 9 Atlas field indication, valid. Priya stared at the folder. Jessa crossed herself without seeming to notice. Captain Ward took a photograph for chain documentation, but did not touch the seal yet. Dr. Hale stood in the records room doorway, all color drawn from his face. Mara felt as though the hospital walls had moved closer. I didn't send this here, she said. Ward's voice was careful. I believe you. Mara looked up at her. Because that is my name. ER is also a file that should never have entered this hospital through routine intake. Hale recovered enough to speak. And perhaps your military office misplaced it. Ward looked at him. Or perhaps someone here ignored routing warnings. I was not chief when these alleged records were created. No, Jessa said quietly, surprising everyone. But you were chief when they arrived. Hale turned on her. Be careful. Jessa lifted her chin. I am being careful. I'm saying what happened. Mara looked at the young aide. Earlier that morning, Jessa had laughed behind a stack of blankets. Not cruelly, maybe nervously. Still, she had laughed. Now her hand shook as she stood in front of Hale. But she did not take the words back. Mara understood then that public humiliation did not only wound the person at the center. It trained everyone watching to choose safety over decency. And when one person finally chose decency, the whole room had to reconsider itself. Ward broke the seal on the folder. Inside were transfer sheets, field notes, and scanned copies of handwritten medical hold cards. Some pages had water damage, some were partial, some carried Mara's initials. The documents named patients who had passed through different facilities after Nightingale 9. Most were marked resolved. 3 were marked unresolved. Daniel Reyes, Thomas Avery, unknown 9 handler. Mara's throat tightened. Evan Cole. Ward did not answer quickly enough. Mara closed her eyes. Sergeant Evan Cole had been Atlas handler. Quiet, patient, always kneeling to check the dog's paws before checking his own gear. He used to say Atlas knew lies before people spoke them, because the dog watched the body instead of the mouth. During Nightingale 9, Cole had disappeared in the confusion of evacuation records. Mara had asked once, then twice, then a third time through official channels. Eventually, a letter came back with language so polished, it cut nothing cleanly. Missing, presumed transferred, further inquiry restricted. She had stopped asking because every question made her supervisors look at her like grief had damaged her judgment. Ward turned a page. Cole survived initial evacuation. Mara opened her eyes. The records room became silent except for the hum of the scanner. What? He survived initial evacuation, Ward repeated. But his transfer identity was sealed under medical protection after threats to the recovery route. His name was separated from Atlas file. Where is he? Ward's jaw tightened. That is what File 9 failed to answer. Mara looked at Atlas. The dog stood beside the red folder, calm but alert, as if he had waited years for humans to catch up. Unknown 9 handler, Mara said. That's him, possibly. No, Atlas brought us to the box. Hale laughed weakly. The dog cannot read names. Mara turned on him so fast he stepped back. No, he can't. But he remembers people you dismissed as paperwork. The words landed hard. Priya flipped through the medication hold pages. There are protocols here for delayed reactions, sedation cautions, therapy limits, environmental triggers, communication notes. None of this is in the active charts, Ward said, which means more patients might have been treated without context. Hale's eyes sharpened, defensive again. No harm has been established. Mara's voice was low. Harm begins when warnings are treated as inconvenience. That sentence seemed to take all the air from him. Ward removed one page and showed it to Mara. This is yours. Mara read it. The handwriting was hurried, unmistakably hers. Atlas indicates reliably when patient file mismatch present. If separated from handler, attach N9 wafer and rub to review. Do not disregard K9 indication in medical transfer context. Dog is calm under pressure and should be treated as field witness. Her eyes blurred. Field witness. She had written that. She remembered now. Not the office, not the final file, but the moment. A temporary table. A failing battery lantern. Atlas sitting beside a row of transport bags. Mara, begging a records officer to understand that the dog had indicated wrong tags twice and saved them from sending patients under incorrect paperwork. The officer had said a dog's behavior was not documentation, so Mara had made it documentation. And somehow that note had slept in a box for 3 years, while Atlas slept in a shelter kennel. Mara pressed her hand to her mouth. Ward's expression softened for the first time. You did your job. Then why does it feel like I abandoned him? Atlas looked up at her. He did not whine. He did not demand comfort. He simply stepped closer and placed his head under her hand. That was the third shift in the hospital. Priya turned away to wipe her eyes. Jessa stopped, pretending she was only there for door codes. Even Hale looked at the dog without mockery for one unguarded second. Then the records room phone rang. Jessa jumped. She answered, "Listen," then looked at Mara. "It's the front desk," she said. "There are soldiers downstairs asking for you." Mara felt every muscle still. Ward's face changed instantly. "How many?" "4. They asked for Nurse Mara Ellison by name. They said they need to come to her door." "Not the ward?" "My door," Mara repeated. Jessa nodded. "They said apartment door. They have a warrant." "No, not a warrant. Sorry, a military authorization packet. They said, it concerns 9 Atlas and File 9. Hale found his voice. "This has become absurd." Ward ignored him and checked her phone. Her expression darkened. "I did not send them." Mara's hand tightened on Atlas' leash. "Then, who did?" No one answered. The question followed them out of the records room. By policy, Mara should have stayed at the hospital. By fear, she should have let Ward handle it. By old training, she should have secured the file, identified the source, and never walk into an unknown situation alone. But the soldiers had not gone to the liaison office. They had not gone to administration. They had gone to her home. Mara lived 15 minutes from Harewood, in a small second-floor apartment above a closed bakery. She had chosen it because it was quiet, because the stairs creaked before anyone reached her door. Because after Nightingale 9, she needed to hear people coming. Ward insisted on escorting her. Priya offered to stay with Reyes and Avery, documenting everything. Jessa promised to copy the intake logs before anyone could misplace them. Hale objected to all of it, then stopped when Ward informed him he was now part of the inquiry and should avoid making memorable statements. Atlas rode in the back of Ward's vehicle beside Mara. He sat upright, looking through the windshield as the hospital fell behind them. Mara rested one hand on his collar. "I should have known you," she whispered. Atlas leaned into her fingers. At her apartment building, 4 soldiers stood at the bottom of the stairs. Not military police. Older, quiet. Their uniforms carried no theatrical shine. only the worn precision of people who had spent more time doing work than displaying it. The man in front removed his cap when he saw Mara. "Staff Specialist Ellison," he said. "I'm Sergeant Major Owen Pierce." Ward stepped ahead. "Who authorized this contact?" Pierce held out a sealed packet. "The handler did." Mara stopped breathing. Behind Pierce, one soldier opened a flat case. Inside lay an old leash, a folded field vest, and a photograph of Atlas beside Sergeant Evan Cole. On the back, in shaky handwriting, were 6 words. "Bring Bishop to the nurse. She'll know." Mara did not remember climbing the stairs. She remembered Atlas moving beside her, one step at a time, matching her pace the way trained dogs matched injured handlers. She remembered Captain Ward telling Sergeant Major Pierce that no one entered the apartment until identities were confirmed. She remembered Pierce accepting that without offense, as if caution was a language he respected. And she remembered the photograph. Atlas younger, darker, standing beside Sergeant Evan Cole, outside a field transport unit. Cole's hand rested lightly on the dog's head. He was not smiling exactly, but his face held the quiet peace people sometimes had around animals because animals did not ask them to explain what hurt. "Bring Bishop to the nurse. She'll know, Bishop, not Atlas." The name the shelter had given him was not random. Mara's apartment door looked suddenly fragile. Blue paint, scratched brass number, a small plant she kept forgetting to water. On any other day, it was the place she came to remove her badge, microwave soup, and let silence settle around her like a blanket. Now soldiers stood outside it with a field vest and a message from a man who might still be alive. Pierce waited until Ward finished checking the authorization packet. Then he spoke to Mara, not around her. "Sergeant Cole was found 2 months ago under a protected identity in a civilian long-term care facility outside Millhaven. He had limited records and limited speech. When his condition improved, he gave us 2 instructions. Find the dog, find the nurse." Mara gripped the doorframe. Ward asked, "Why was I not informed?" Pierce's eyes stayed on Mara. "Because File 9 had multiple locks and at least one false closure. Every request routed through standard channels returned incomplete." Cole remembered the dog's alternate field name, Bishop. "That led us to the shelter." Mara looked down at Atlas. "You were with him?" Pierce nodded. Briefly. Cole could not keep him at the facility. Atlas was transferred through a volunteer chain that was supposed to deliver him to a military contact. Somewhere along that chain, paperwork failed. He ended up at the shelter. Paperwork failed. Such a small phrase for a loyal dog waiting behind kennel bars. Mara opened the apartment door with shaking hands. "Come in." The room filled carefully. Ward stood near the window. Pierce and one soldier entered. The others remained outside by unspoken agreement. Atlas crossed the threshold last. The moment he entered, he went to the corner beside Mara's old storage chest. Mara froze. She had not opened that chest in over a year. It held uniforms she never wore, commendations she did not display, letters she had not answered, and one gray scarf from Nightingale 9 that still carried a smell her memory could not bear. Atlas sat beside it and looked at her. Pierce said quietly, "Cole said you kept the duplicate." Mara shook her head. "I don't know what her think. I have thought for 3 years." "No," Ward said, not unkindly. "You have avoided thinking in order to survive. That is different." The words struck with painful accuracy. Mara knelt by the chest. Her fingers hesitated over the latch. She had locked away that life because every time she opened it, guilt crawled out first. Guilt for patience she could not remember clearly. Guilt for Cole. Guilt for Atlas. Guilt for coming home with hands that still worked when others came home changed beyond easy language. Atlas lowered himself beside her, not pushing, waiting. She opened the chest. Inside were folded uniforms, sealed envelopes, a small box of service coins, and beneath them, wrapped in the gray scarf, a waterproof document sleeve. Mara stared at it. I don't remember putting that there. Pierce exhaled. Cole hoped you wouldn't. Ward crouched. My eye. Mara handed it to her. Inside the sleeve was a duplicate field ledger, paper, not digital. The kind used when systems failed and no one trusted electronic routing. The cover had Mara's handwriting. A 9 manual hold copy for medical review if primary file compromised. Her stomach turned. Primary file compromised. Ward opened the ledger. Page after page listed patient identifiers, hold protocols, transfer cautions, and 9 indications, not classified mission details, medical continuity details, the things that should have followed people home and had not. Then they reached the final page. Unknown 9 handler, Evan Cole. High trust with Atlas. Possible communication limits after recovery. Do not separate from 9 if avoidable, if separation unavoidable. Route Atlas to Ellison or Ward. Handler has memorized alternate name Bishop for identity-safe recognition. Myra covered her face. She had written the instruction that could have brought Atlas to her, and then she had forgotten the ledger existed. Pierce spoke softly. You were injured by exhaustion and stress after that operation, specialist. Your memory gaps were documented. Mara flinched. I don't say it to diminish you. Everyone says that before they diminish you. The room went quiet. Ward closed the ledger halfway. Mara, listen to me. You created the backup that might protect 3 patients and reconnect a handler with his dog. Forgetting where you hid it does not erase that. Mara laughed once, brokenly. I've spent 3 years being told I overreact. I nearly believed it this morning. Atlas lifted his head. She looked at him through tears she still tried not to shed. They laughed at you. Pierce looked toward the dog. They won again, but Mara knew justice was rarely that simple. People who mocked in public often apologized in private, if at all. Systems that failed patients blamed forms, staffing, transitions, software. The ledger would matter only if someone had the courage to open it fully. Word seemed to read her thoughts. We need to return to Halewood. Pierce nodded. Cole is being transferred there now under military medical escort. That is why we came directly. He requested Ellison present before any evaluation. Myra stood too quickly. Hi, coming. Pierce checked his watch. When? Pierce checked his watch. Within the hour. Ward swore under her breath, then caught herself. Hale cannot oversee that intake. No, Mara said. Everyone looked at her. She wiped her face with the back of her hand. The old Mara would have waited for Ward to issue orders. The frightened hospital nurse would have worried about suspension. The woman who had stood in the 9 doorway that morning had swallowed humiliation until it nearly became obedience. But Atlas had found Reyes. Atlas had found Avery. Atlas, the ledger, and the path back to Cole. A calm dog had done what proud humans had refused to do. Mara clipped the old field leash from Pierce's case to Atlas' collar. The dog accepted it with solemn recognition. We go back, she said. We opened the file in front of the people who closed their eyes. Ward's mouth curved slightly. Mouth fast sounded like staff specialist Ellison. No, Mara said. That sounded like a nurse. They returned to Halewood with the ledger sealed inside Ward's case and Atlas sitting between Mara and the door. No sirens. No spectacle, just a vehicle moving through afternoon traffic while a hospital waited to learn that the shelter dog it had laughed at carried more truth than its records. At the entrance, staff had gathered despite themselves. Rumors traveled through hospitals faster than lab results. Priya stood near the admission bay with a pale but determined face. Jessa waited by the desk with printed intake logs in a folder. Hale stood near administration, flanked by two executives who looked as though they had been summoned from lunch into disaster. Mara stepped through the doors with Atlas. The lobby fell silent, not because soldiers entered behind her, because this time no one laughed. Then the ambulance bay doors opened, and Sergeant Evan Cole was wheeled inside under escort. A weight, thin, older than memory, but alive. Atlas saw him. For one suspended second, the dog did not move. Then Cole raised two fingers from the blanket in the smallest command Mara had ever seen. Atlas walked forward, stopped beside the stretcher, and laid his head gently against Cole's hand. The entire hospital watched a missing file become a living man. No one in the lobby spoke for a long time. Hospitals were not quiet places. Even when people hushed their voices, machines hummed, carts rolled, phones rang, shoes squeaked, doors sighed open and shut. But when Atlas placed his head under Evan Cole's hand, Haywood Veterans Hospital seemed to hold its breath. Cole's fingers moved slowly over the dog's head. Atlas closed his eyes. Mara stood a few feet away, unable to step closer, unable to look away. She had imagined Cole dead for 3 years because grief, when denied facts, writes its own ending. She had mourned him in unfinished ways, pausing over coffee when someone said his name, avoiding the 9 Memorial Wall, refusing to ask Ward too many questions because each answer had once arrived wrapped in official fog. Now he was here, alive, changed, yes, thin, tired, with a voice that seemed to require effort from some deep reserve. But alive. Cole turned his head toward Mara. His eyes found hers. "Doc," he whispered. The name broke her, not because it was accurate. She had never been a doctor. Cole had called her that in the field to tease her when she corrected everyone's bandage technique, hydration schedule, and stubborn refusal to admit pain. "Yes, Doc," he would say, while doing exactly what she told him. Mara stepped closer. "I'm here." Cole's fingers remained in Atlas' fur. "New head find you." "I should have found him first." Cole's gaze sharpened with surprising strength. No one word. A command and forgiveness together. Ward moved to the foot of the stretcher. "Sergeant Cole, we're going to complete your intake under N9 whole protocol. Nurse Ellison has the duplicate ledger." Cole closed his eyes briefly, relief passing over his face. Hale stepped forward. "This patient's intake must still comply with hospital procedure." Every head turned. It was astonishing, Mara thought, how some men could stand before living proof and still reach for process as a shield. Ward's voice was icy. Hospital procedure failed to identify 2 existing N9 patients and attempted to remove the 9, who indicated the discrepancy. Hale looked around and realized the lobby was no longer his room. Priya stood with the medical kit. Jessa held the logs. The executives kept their distance. Soldiers watched without expression. Staff members, who had laughed that morning, now stared at the floor. At Lara. Anywhere but at Hale. Mara felt the old fear rise. The fear of being called emotional, difficult, disruptive. The fear that if she spoke too directly, the truth would be dismissed as tone. Atlas lifted his head from Cole's hand and looked back at her. "Calm witness," she breathed in. "Dr. Hale," she said, "you can participate if you follow the whole protocol. You cannot lead this intake." His face darkened. "You do not have authority to remove me." "No," Mara said. "But Captain Ward does. And your own records will." Jessa stepped forward and handed Ward the intake logs. The transfer boxes were marked for restricted review. They were rerouted to general scanning after Dr. Hale signed the backlog clearance. Hale snapped, "You do not understand administrative coding." Priya spoke next. "Corporal Rai's medication. Alert patch was in personal effects and not scanned. Mr. Avery's hold card was not uploaded. Both had symptoms that were minimized in notes. One of the hospital executives finally said, "Dr. Hale, step aside pending review." Hale looked stunned, not because he was innocent, Myra thought, but because consequences had arrived in front of witnesses. He stepped back. No applause came. This was not that kind of victory. A patient still needed care. Records still needed correction. Trust had not magically repaired itself. But something shifted in the lobby, and everyone felt it. The public humiliation that had begun at the 9-unit doorway had turned back on the man who created it, not through revenge, but through evidence. Myra took charge of what she knew how to do. "Dr. Shah," she said, "quiet intake room. Low stimulation. Jessa, call neurology and pharmacy. Review with N9, flag visible. Captain Ward, I need authorized copies of the whole protocol. Sergeant Major Pierce, Atlas stays with Cole unless care requires space. And if he must move, he moves with me." Pierce nodded. "Understood." Cole's mouth curved faintly. "I see." Myra looked down at him. "Still alive to complain, Sergeant." His faint smile was worth every painful memory. They moved him to a quiet room near the 9 recovery wing. Atlas walked beside the stretcher, not pulling, not crowding, simply present. Staff parted to let them pass. No one called him stray now. No one joked about junkiers or shelter mistakes. One of the residents who had laughed earlier whispered, "I'm sorry," as Myra passed. Myra did not stop, but she heard it. That mattered less than changed behavior would, but more than silence. Cole's intake took time. It was careful, repetitive, and unglamorous. The real work of medicine. Verify identity. Compare records. Check allergies and response risks. Confirm current status. Avoid assumptions. Ask the patient what he knows. Listen when answers come slowly. Let the dog remain where he comes rather than distracts. Reyes stabilized under specialist care. Avery's plan was corrected and his daughter was told, in plain language, that her father had been right to insist something was missing. Priya documented everything with a precision that made Myra proud. Jessa found 2 more routing errors before dinner and sent copies through Ward before anyone could bury them. By evening, the red file N9 sat open in a secure conference room, not fully open to everyone. Some pages remained restricted. Some names stayed covered. But the medical portions, the warnings that mattered for safe care, were finally released to the people treating the patients. That was what Myra had wanted all along. Not glory, not secrets, continuity. The humble mercy of the right note, reaching the right hands before harm could grow. Kale did not attend the conference. He had been placed on administrative leave pending review. Rumor said he had blamed faulty systems, vague military communication, and emotional overreach by nursing staff. Myra almost laughed when she heard that. Almost. Ward sat across from her after the others left. Atlas slept beside Cole's chair in the adjacent room, visible through the interior window. Cole dozed with one hand near the dog's collar. "You know there will be questions," Ward said. Myra nodded. "There should be. About the file, the routing, the shelter transfer, good D? And about you." Myra looked at the table. Ward continued, "Some people will want to make you a symbol. Some will want to make you a problem. Often the same people." Myra gave a tired smile. "Hospitals and military offices have that in common." Ward leaned back. "What do you want?" The question felt too large. Myra looked through the window at Atlas and Cole. The dog slept with the peace of a mission completed. But Myra knew better. Healing was not completion. It was repetition. Showing up again, letting trust return through small acts. "I want Reyes and Avery protected," Myra said. "I want Cole treated like a man, not a misplaced file. I want Atlas never put behind a sheltered gate again. And I want every nurse in this hospital to know that noticing is not insubordination. Ward studied her. And for yourself, Mara did not answer quickly. For herself, she wanted to stop flinching at her own past. She wanted to forgive the woman who had hidden a ledger and forgotten it. She wanted to stop measuring her worth by the contempt of men who confused cruelty with control. She wanted to cry without feeling defeated. Atlas lifted his head in the next room, as if sensing the thought. Mara laughed softly through the ache. I want to take my dog home, she said. Ward smiled. Your dog? Mara looked at her. Ask him. They did. Later, when Cole was awake enough, Ward explained the options. Atlas could be formally returned to military 9 care. He could remain with Cole if medical housing allowed. He could be placed through a veterans support program. Or, with Cole's consent and proper review, Mara could become his permanent guardian while allowing visits as part of Cole's rehabilitation. Cole listened, then looked at Atlas. Bishop, he said softly. The dog raised his head. Cole turned to Mara. He chose. Mara's eyes filled again. This time she did not force the tears back. I'll bring him every day you want, she said. Cole nodded. He'll bring you too. That was when Mara understood. Atlas had not only found patience, he had found the part of her she left in that field hospital. The nurse who trusted what she saw, who spoke even when officers frowned, who wrote backup notes because lives depended on boring details, who believed a calm dog could be evidence when everyone else dismissed him. The next morning, the 9-unit doorway looked different. Same clean floor, same labeled hooks, same bright lights. But when Mara arrived with Atlas at her side, staff members stepped aside respectfully. Priya met her with updated charts. Jessa had placed a new sign near the ward desk. 9 field indications must be reported to clinical lead. Someone had written beneath it, in smaller letters. Listen first. Mara touched the sign, then looked down at Atlas. You caused trouble, she whispered. Atlas blinked, serene and unapologetic. From inside the unit, Cole's voice called weakly. He learned from you. Mara smiled. And for the first time in 3 years, the hospital hallway did not feel like a place where she had to shrink to survive. It felt like a place where a sheltered dog had carried a hidden file back into the light, and everyone who had laughed was now learning how silence sounds when truth walks in on 4 calm paws. Some heroes arrive with medals, some arrive with sealed files, and some arrive from shelters, gray-muzzled and unwanted, carrying the truth no one else protected. Mara learned that loyalty can wait years without turning bitter, and justice can begin with one quiet dog refusing to move. If this story touched your heart, share where you are watching from, and subscribe for more stories of courage, healing, and hidden heroes.